Hello, everyone. My name is Umar Harmanshah. I'm an associate professor of art history here at UIC, and I mainly teach classes on ancient Near Eastern art and archaeology. My research is on, these days, on climate change and the history of landscapes and spaces in the Middle East, in the ancient Middle East, particularly. I'm very grateful to Leili Adibvar for inviting me to present to you a set of lectures this week, and I'm going to be talking about mainly prehistoric and Mesopotamian cultures. This week I am presenting to you two sets of lectures which take up questions of human and animal bodies and evaluate nakedness and nudity from the perspective of how ancient communities conceived their bodies, represented and presented their bodies, whether they're sexualized or divinized or exaggerated or hybridized. So I'm going to be sharing with you some ideas using visual and material evidence collected by archaeologists, particularly archaeological work, and to think about what it means to be human through the representation of these bodies in images, in sculpture, particularly in small miniature representations of human bodies that we call figurines. And other forms of representation like paintings on cave walls and walls of houses. So in the first set of lectures, we will focus on animal and human bodies in prehistoric societies. And I use prehistoric to refer to particularly the Upper Paleolithic hunter-gatherer communities who lived in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, particularly across these landscapes, as well as the Neolithic societies in the Middle East, particularly in the aftermath of the agricultural revolution at the beginnings of settled life, when plants and animals start to be domesticated. So we will primarily study figurines and painted and incised images on cave walls and the walls of houses. In your reading for this set of lectures, you will engage with Preston Miracle and Dusan Boric's article where they discuss animal and human divide and our presumptions about this kind of division between animals and human bodies, and critique this divide as fundamentally modern, a modern conception, and pursue alternative understandings of human bodies. In the second set of lectures, we will move substantially further in time and turn to the urban societies of Mesopotamia, ancient Mesopotamia, primarily from the 2nd millennium BCE, from the time period called the Old Babylonian period or the Middle Bronze Age. When we see actually a sharp explosion, an explosion of representations of the human body with sort of explicit sexuality and gender identity marked on those bodies in the everyday culture. So here we see, as Zainab Bahrani argues in your second reading, that the Mesopotamian image of the female body, with its visual emphasis on the vulva, constructs femininity as the seductive object of desire in really sharp contrast to the rather conservative visual culture of classical Greece in the Iron Age. In that sense, I will precisely arguing against Kenneth Clark's old and now woefully outdated argument that the nude is an art form invented by the Greeks in the 5th century BCE. a statement that either demonstrate a total ignorance of how human bodies are represented among prehistoric and Mesopotamian and Egyptian, I might say, societies, or simply ignoring the evidence for the sake of a white supremacist argument on the superiority of classical civilizations. In fact, I follow Zeynep Bahrani's critique of Kenneth Clark's definition of naked and the nude, nude being a high art and aesthetic form, while being naked is associated with being sexual, pornographic, and bad. There is absolutely no evidence in antiquity that ancient communities differentiated such terms, and there's plenty of textual and visual evidence that suggests that nudity was understood as a form of power, as sexual allure, especially with respect to the female body. And we'll discuss this in greater detail in the second set of lectures. Let's get started with a fascinating and exciting find from a Neolithic house in south central Turkey from the site of Çatalhöyük, one of the first largest agricultural communities we know from the Middle East. The Neolithic inhabitants of Çatalhöyük house dug a hole in the old foundations of a house and laid down a miniature human figure carved beautifully in marble and covered it with 2 layers of clean sand and clay. And they placed a tiny obsidian blade to go with this figurine and sealed it off with a whitewashed, clean platform. What does it mean to make miniature humans? And what does it signify the way we give shape to our bodies, to the representation of our bodies, to their faces, the way we represent their sex and gender identity? This is a question that is constantly asked and explored by archaeologists, anthropologists, and art historians in thinking about figurines, in prehistoric figurines. And I'd like to bring this up in my lecture. This large female figurine, which is about 17 centimeters or 7 inches, about yay high, was carved from recrystallized limestone, and the representation follows a form of the female form that we know from other representations from the Neolithic period. At the site, a body with an overabundance of flesh, showing corpulent limbs, stomach, buttocks, and breasts. The workmanship on the figurine demonstrates considerably high level of technical expertise and a complex understanding of the human body, and especially considering the sagging, fleshy belly and the raised buttocks. So we want to ask, what is the politics of the representation of the body here? In my classes, I explore this question of what does it mean to make miniature humans. Miniature humans with idealized bodies, and what does it say about the politics of representation of sexuality in general? A particularly fruitful comparison is the Barbie doll and the prehistoric figurine, especially thinking in these terms. Barbie dolls equally have impossibly unrealistic human proportions, like that of the prehistoric figurines, perhaps speaking about different body stereotypes and ideals. Also, the idea of a doll which obtains a performative role in the event of the child's play is very critical here. When a child plays with a doll, the play is only possible when the doll is imagined as a real human being. If we can't imagine that, the play will not happen, is literally not possible. So figurines, prehistoric figurines, the idea is that the prehistoric figurines may have a similar kind of a performative role, even if they may not function entirely, or they may not have been made entirely as dolls. They may have served a different purpose, but the performative function remains the same. This brings us finally to a broader question of the image. What is an image? What does an image do? And if we consider, for example, these negative handprints on prehistoric cave walls that we often find in Paleolithic cave paintings, what is the gesture of printing your hand's image permanently on the surfaces of living rock? As my colleague Rebecca Schneider has asked, is this a hailing from the past? So let me lay down my arguments for these lectures. The first one is the observation that there is an interest in prehistoric art in depicting wild and ferocious animals. And that these ferocious animals are deemed to be powerful, potent, demonic, and apotropaic. Therefore, the image that is made in the process also becomes efficacious, potent, and divine, while at the same time making the spaces also potent. Secondly, in prehistoric art, we often find animal-human hybrids, meaning human bodies are sometimes seamlessly hybridized with animal bodies, creating somehow fictive anatomies or monsters, as David Vengro would like to call them. This challenges our conventional understanding of bodies as sites of identity and suggests that there are radically different conceptualizations of the body in antiquity. Third, we can suggest that representations of human bodies are explicitly gendered and their sexuality is marked, especially in figurine form that we will be discussing, particularly for the prehistoric figurines. Naked female and male bodies with exaggerated features like voluptuous bodies, pendulous breasts, marked genitalia, and erect penises are important examples, and we see them in both Upper Paleolithic hunter-gatherers and Neolithic agriculturalists. I'd like to associate these representations with a bodily ideal, accumulated wisdom and age, and a certain kind of eroticism. And these bodies have been usually associated in conventional literature as goddesses or mother goddesses, or they're associated with fertility. But art historians are moving away from these interpretations that impose a lot of modern conceptions of bodies on ancient societies for which we have no evidence. We have no evidence for these being goddesses. The fourth and final point is the consciousness of death. And particularly in early settled communities in the Neolithic villages, we see practices and rituals associated with the long dead bodies of beloved ancestors. And the long dead bodies of the beloved ancestors are brought up to the earth and treated with plastering and inlaying their eyes and beautifying, and these body parts are returned to the graves. And this treatment of the skulls of the long dead beloved relatives, the refleshing and reanimating of the beloved ancestors within the family makes very important suggestions about how they conceived and understood the afterlife. In the next 2 lectures, I'm going to open up these 4 arguments by using examples drawn from prehistoric art. So thank you so much.